Hey everybody. Love seeing all these beautiful faces. We are so happy to have all of y'all here for the Atlanta Mushroom Festival. Second one this year. Thank you so much for coming out. I have the esteemed pleasure to introduce Dr. George H. Grant, who is with the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. He serves as the co-founder and co-director of the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality, aiding in the developing healthcare distress intervention programs and tools that cut across cultural boundaries to bolster the well-being, resilience, and compassion of healthcare patients and staff. He received his Bachelor of Arts from Wofford College, a Masters of Divinity in Theological and Ministerial Studies from Emory University, and a Doctorate in Philosophy and Psychology of Religion from Boston University. He has worked as the Clinical Educator at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Boston, the Director of Spiritual Care at the University of Washington Medicine, the Director of Research and Innovation at Emory Center for Pastoral Services, and is now the Executive Director for Spiritual Health in the TheWoodruf Health Sciences Center at Emory University. He is responsible for the education of spiritual health clinicians, the service of spiritual health to patients and staff across Emory Healthcare, and is a scientific research arm driving evidence-based outcomes. It is my great pleasure to welcome George to the stage. Thank you, Dr. Grant.
Thank you, Paul. What an amazing event that Dave and Paul pulled together, isn't it? It's really, just give them a hand, right? Emory, who knew, right? We will have our second birthday next month. And already we've been able to achieve a rather high demand for our expertise. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, but I'm also going to start by telling you I had a dream the other night. You got to follow your dreams. So my dream was I was in Hyde Park in London, and if you ever have a privilege to go to Hyde Park in London on a Sunday, then you'll know that there are speakers all over the park, standing on boxes or ladders, and they're ranting and raving about the politics of the day or religion or any other topic that will gather an audience. And so it's a thing in Hyde Park on Sunday to walk around and visit all the speakers. It is a really cool thing. And I dreamt that I was in Hyde Park, standing on a box, speaking to you about the topic of the day. And I'm just delighted. I'm thing one of part one of part, and then we're going to have part two after me. Thing two, Dr. Ali John Zarabi is following me, and you'll want to hear what he has to say about his clinical study. But let me start by saying I was walking around downstairs just a second ago, and I saw a young woman wearing a green t-shirt, and on the back of the t-shirt it said, "You were raised on shit." And it got me thinking about gardening and horticulture, and I take a deep appreciation for what the Mushroom Festival stands for, and that is health. That's the number one value, I feel like, that is at the core of what Dave and Paul pulled together, and I'm very grateful to be a part of the experience. So I come from lint and dust. So my father grew up in a poor cotton mill village where at 6 years old, he was a lint head. And that meant he went up and down the aisles, changing bobbins and also sweeping the cotton from the floors. And that's where I claim a part of my heritage is from lint. I also claim on my mother's side, she was one of 9 children to a coal miner in East Tennessee. And my grandmother on my mother's side, he quit school at 3rd grade to actually help as a boy in the mines, and he achieved black dust in his lungs, and he succumbed to that, in his 50s. He was not able to actually read or write. But he was known also when he wasn't in the mine as being the caretaker of animals in the small community. He was known as the vet. And my mother, being the oldest child, she would read to him out of vet manuals, animal science, on how to do things. And he had such a keen mind that he would go and perform whatever kind of medical service that he could to the animals. So I have a great deal of pride on both sides of my family. They both were in poverty, but they both then achieved, like the old phrase, they pulled up their bootstraps and they got busy. And my dad served in World War II. He landed on Okinawa, and his hand was shot through, and he was the pharmacist mate, which means he was the medic taking care of people on the beach. So first he had to sew up his hand in order then to take care of other people on the beach. He went to college on the GI Bill, and then became an attorney for poor people. And I remember as a child that people would come, and these were people from our town, poor black people and poor white people, who would come bringing vegetables or a freshly cut chicken, whatever they could afford, so that he could supply them legal counsel. And because he did that, he was under a lot of tension and pressure from the community. He would hold secret meetings of the black attorneys in our community, in our house late at night, because they could not form together. And I remember this as a child, and we actually had a cross burning in our yard one night. But it didn't occur to me that we were in any kind of danger or anything like that. He was just doing what he was called to do. And he was bold, and he did not matter of the consequence. So I come to you today saying those things because I think it's important that when you are at the forefront, maybe even out on the edge of something, that to be motivated by justice and by health, you can supplant any kind of obstacle. And I truly, yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I never really wanted to be a minister, to be honest with you. I went and did my Master of Divinity degree just so I could say that I was in graduate school. But it occurred to me that I had lots to learn about myself, and then to do the kind of bold work that I had been raised to be about from both sides of my family. So I began leading spiritual health departments back in the 90s, first in Boston and then in Seattle. And this was traditionally the work of healthcare chaplaincy. So when in the hospital, you would have a person that was actually, you might have thought they were coming from outside the hospital. They were actually part of the staff of the hospital. And so I've been a part of that movement now for over 35 years, making sure that those folks were competent in what they were to be about, which meant if you were not trained to be multicultural and you were not trained to be inclusive and all-embracing of the variety of cultures that you were attending to, then that's not the work for you. So I was a part of the training of these folks, but also if I discovered that, those folks were not equipped personally or professionally to be about that work, then they really are not welcome in healthcare. And so when I returned to Emory, I took over a department that was largely based in the hospital, and it was perceived that we were like representatives of the community. Like our folks would go in to visit with someone, and the question would be asked, now what church are you from, and who sent you here? That kind of thing. And so it was up to us to say, no, we're here for you. We're part of the healthcare team. So that's the kind of challenge that we've been about, changing perceptions and helping people to become open to a sense in their own healing while they're in the hospital in great distress. And I give you all this background so as you might understand, well, why in the hell is he a part of psychedelics? How did this come to be? Well, maybe hell is a good word to use. There are a lot of people in distress in this world, both physically and mentally. And I feel like if I'm not part of the movement to be with people who are in that kind of distress, then I'm really not doing the world much good. And that I should be out there on the end of a diving board or the end of a pier, jumping sometimes prematurely. I should be bold and take risks. I should be setting an example for my children and also setting an example for healthcare in general to say what we are engaged in right now with the use of psychedelic medicine and the assisted therapy along with it is nothing short than a phenomenal sea change in terms of addressing mental illness, achieving spiritual and mental wellness. And so it occurred to me that when clinical trials and studies began in the aughts, that a good deal of report from these clinical trials suggested and even had actual evidence to prove that persons undergoing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy had experienced some kind of mystical or spiritual experience while they were engaged in this type of therapy. And there are varying percentages of people that actually attest to that. I won't get into that. Ali John might. But what I will say to you is that when I began to hear that, and I thought, okay, who are the people running the studies? Is there anyone from professional spiritual health actually attending to people in this psychotherapy? And are there any persons from the science perspective coming from spirituality or religion or any kind of transformative multicultural experience, are they engaged in the studies? And what I found out was, no, not many. Now, there were some, bold scientists that said, we do value spirituality, but persons who had been trained in this area to be attentive to where a person might be in terms of spirituality or no spirituality, because that's who, we attend to. But then they might go through this psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy and say, my God, I went in there thinking I had no spirituality. And then I come away from this experience, and what do I do with this profound spiritual experience that has awakened me in some way? What do I do with it? How do I make this work in terms of my health, in terms of following through on the goal of the therapy, which was to ameliorate the distress? So when I heard that there was not really a professional spiritual health component, I went to my director of research in spiritual health, running my research team, and it happens to be Chuck Raison, who is a psychiatrist, world-renowned in addressing depression. But also, he had taken up another side work, which was psychedelic medicine, but not with us. He had all these other posts around the country. And I said, Chuck, why are we not in this game? He said, good question, we should. So I said, I'm willing for us to think about how we can implement science, not just dream up things and watch them flitter away, but also making sure that we have practical solutions that come from our science. And while this is all going on, I knew of a young physician scientist, Ali John Zarabi, he's sitting right over there, who said, look, I want to do a study of working with demoralized cancer patients. And when I knew that he was deeply devoted to the work, the science and the art of spiritual health, I knew there was something fomenting that leads to a creation of something of value and of worth to the community, of Emory, healthcare in general, and the world. So I started, working with the Department of Psychiatry and said, look, and then I met a psychiatrist in the Department of Psychiatry who was doing clinical trials in psychedelic medicine, but nobody knew about it. Everybody was afraid, like if it became public, that somehow Emory would be laughed off the map and it would be considered, a joke, because there was still that stigma associated with psychedelics. So I got with Bodhi Dunlop. He's world-renowned as a psychopharmacologist and runs the mood and anxiety disorders program in the Department of Psychiatry. And I said, Bodhi, it seems to me that we need to form a partnership. We've got a scientist wanting to do a study that is more public than your studies. And I think we have something going. So lo and behold, being a person that doesn't ask permission for anything, I said, let's form a center. And we designed a website. We got Emory branding involved. And we were born 2 years ago. And to this day, I've never asked permission on why we exist. Emory is, thank you. And so if you go to Psychedelics Emory, you Google it up, you'll see that what we're engaged in is a vital contribution to health. And that's what we are about. I'd like to say too that, in the creation of this center, it does invite a lot of interest. So we've had a good deal of interest of people wanting to be in studies and so forth. And my colleague, Melise Crozier, she's sitting in the back. She's at a table back there. And we have a table, the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. And Melise is a master in public health, and she's my both arms. And she has information about the center and what we might have available in terms of clinical trials. But more importantly, for me being here today, was to say that in pursuit of establishing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy as a legitimate above-ground treatment, we represent, supplying the evidence that says it works. Now, that doesn't mean it always works, because medicine doesn't work the same for everyone. But we are seeing remarkable results. And again, Dr. Zrabi is going to share some of those pieces with you. And, that's all it takes for me to continue to devote myself to making sure that, your local university is at the profound front edge, the bleeding edge of this kind of health. And so I want to welcome you to ask questions or anything that you want to of me, or maybe even give stories that you might want to share with each other. And because I know that all of us want to achieve health, and we may have found some ways of doing that are not on the beaten path, that are not traditional. And what we stand for at ECPS is ethical practice and ethical science. We want to support the community widespread by demonstrating what we can find out about adverse effects, adverse events, and really be at the forefront of safety. Safety is our key understanding of our existence. And we want to be able to support FDA approval for psilocybin when it comes up next. As most of you know, MDMA is being considered right at this moment, and we'll hear in August about MDMA-assisted therapy being regulated by the FDA. But we want to work with, our local community and the university at large, and with the people that we serve, to make sure that they're getting the most viable alternatives for intractable problems. So I want to invite any kind of questions, or if you want to come up and tell a story, that's cool too. Yes, sir. What the question is, if a licensed psychologist or any licensed person, I think, wanted to achieve this kind of therapy for a patient or a client, how would you go about doing that? How would you go about even approaching us? We're still developing relationships with the community. We haven't achieved yet an assembly of psychotherapists that we can work with, consistently in clinical trial. But understand this, even though we still are in clinical trial mode, which is highly regulated, our intention is to be on the forefront of training and to train people who are existing psychotherapists on the modalities that we're learning about. And a lot of what we are focused on is what we call a triad model. The triad model is taking a spiritual health clinician, working with a mental health clinician, and seeing the care seeker, the patient, as an expert. That's why we call it the triad. And to work in that kind of a healing team to make sure that we are understanding, all the intricate, details and cultural values that a person needs to be attended to. So it's not going to be too long for us to get to a point where we are actually training people intentionally, sort of as fellowships and so forth within the center, but also working with local psychotherapists to allow those persons at first to be in trials, and secondly, to work with them when there is FDA regulation, and work with this within this kind of triad model. So thank you for that question. That's really cool. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, do you have, what does it look like? What does the method look like, given that you have different problems that are being attended to, and what kind of protocols are essentially might be different from one person to the other? That really depends on the trial, the study that it becomes funded. You have to meet the criteria of the funder, and there might be restrictions based on, they're really targeting, whether it is depression, intractable depression, or whether it's PTSD, whether it's end-of-life suffering that Ali John's working with, and what might there be in terms of difference between those modalities. Remarkably, there is in the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy world kind of a congealed moment right now where most of the trials you have like two therapists and the care seeker. And most of the trials have been necessarily involving licensed clinicians, and maybe the second person does not need to be a licensed clinician. And they mostly follow a protocol of having preparation sessions with the care seeker. So like 2 or 3 extended sessions, gaining a sense of a person's life history, again, values, and also creating a trusting rapport with the two persons, because these two persons essentially are going to be with you in the dosing sessions. And in a psilocybin trial, usually it's been like one long dosing session of about 8 hours. And so you're in this experience with the two therapists for that extended period of time. And then there is post-dosing therapy that we call integration. And in the integration piece, you might have several sessions that extend out. And they differ according to, again, what study has been designed. But that's been kind of the accepted model. We don't know yet if that's the kind of model that is realistic or, will be with us in the long term. I mean, Alejandra and I had these conversations a good bit, and, it could be that it's okay just to have one clinician maybe in the dosing session, and that you have psychotherapy on both sides of that dosing session. And that, there will be a variety of helping supportive modalities, such as spiritual health clinician, attending to a person in the long term. So we're advocating for kind of a mixed model. And Alijan and several other scientists are engaged at thinking about the triad model as existing in different formations. And so we are like open right now. It's like open season with regard to understanding what's going to be most effective. We don't yet know because we haven't had the number of clinical studies yet.
To build on that a little bit, this research isn't new. They were doing things like this in the 60s, so it's not like a tabula rasa.
Right.
And then it became illegal.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, where did a lot of that research leave off, and where are you building on some of that research?
The comment is, in the 60s, there was a good deal of research before a lot of these compounds became Schedule I and it became illegal. And there was a lot of research. In fact, there was, what was it like, Alijan, it's like at least 1,600 clinical studies, and we've lost a lot of the data. It's almost as if the field had to start from scratch because it became so defamed because of what occurred during the all hate drugs season. And without real differentiation about what the healthy compounds and what's not so healthy. And a lot of the public perception too, as you know, is that a lot of psychedelics were assumed to be very harmful and addictive. When they can be abused, but it's not the case that for most psychedelic compounds, they're not addictive as what you might have in another Schedule I compound. So it wasn't really fair to lump,
But in addition to the drugs, the configurations too, like what you were talking about, how you have doctors or scientists
Yeah.
and even artists involved.
Right.
Is that some of those configurations available? Like how you set up these?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're a good example of kind of taking on, say, the status quo, which has really been, to a large degree, run by psychiatry, and making sure that we have these qualities of persons from other disciplines engaged, so that a person feels welcomed and not so much an experiment, right? So that's why I use the terminology care seeker, as the expert. And if we're not paying attention to the person as bringing in the rich story of what has worked and what has not worked in their lifetime, then we're missing out. We're just treating a symptom and not a person. So I truly believe that ECPS at least aspires to be a bridging toward multicultural experiences. And when I say multicultural experiences, I'm talking about what has been, termed as underground or above ground indigenous experience with plant medicines and fungi. Because they've been going on for, thousands and thousands of years. And what we're attempting to do is bridge as a scholarly and scientific movement to make sure that we, not having to invent, and think that we're inventing the wheel when the wheels have already been invented. So it's a very good point, and we hope to be, in pursuit of that kind of value to the community. Yes?
Is there a number that a clinician could call to get in touch with your center directly?
Yeah, Melise in the back, she has, she's waving. Hello, Melise. Please go back there because you can point your phone at, a little QR code, and it'll get you to a number where studies are being conducted. Yeah. And really, the website is chock full. You could spend 4 years on our website with the content available. It's really quite astounding. In fact, Allie John's study was the subject of a PBS special. He's going to talk about it in a little bit. But there's so much to share with the community, particularly in Atlanta. When I said we're going to do this no matter what, and didn't ask permission of anybody, a part of that is I knew that we would get a lot of pushback, right? So why would I ask when I know there would be a lot of people that were afraid? Even to this day, we were just the subject of a major article in the Emory Medicine magazine. Goes to like 80,000 subscribers. Well, I've not heard from anybody in leadership about the article. Nobody. Crickets. And it's really kind of astounding, that we're doing things right here at Emory that in some cases, and I'm not trying to denigrate where I work, but I will have to state the fact that we're better known and in some ways more respected nationally and internationally at just 2 years old than we are locally. And, my hope is that things will begin to change as people calm down and they realize that we're not threatening, the universe and doing something, illegal. Yes.
You might just be a threat to people that don't want healing breaking down. There's always this theory that the folks that sell weapons don't want to see peace break down. And that just may be a tone somewhere. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, maybe I'm getting ahead, is there any trials that are close to coming out? I invested in mind medicine a couple years ago, hearing good studies were in there, and I believe that they're really close. Is there any that you're privy to talk about?
That we would be conducting?
Well,
Or,
that you know of. I know mind medicine is just one
yeah,
that you can invest in that has PTSD and anxiety
right.
in late stages. But is there any any other trials you can talk about? Any studies?
Well, not cogently, to be honest. Again, there are nonprofits and for-profit companies that want to rule the universe. And one of them being Lycos, which was a derivative of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science. And Lycos is the one who's applied for FDA approval for MDMA-assisted therapy. Now, it's a for-profit, they call it a public benefit corporation, but it's a for-profit company. And if they get approval, they already have a plan to build brick and mortar services all over the country. In fact, the regional rep for Lycos, had a meeting with me about a month ago to tell me what might be coming. Now, to some degree, that's a good thing, right? People are, can be helped, particularly with PTSD. That's what the application is for. But, there's no one size fits all. MDMA is not for everybody. And we're doing a study actually at Emory with MDMA and prolonged exposure therapy combined for the treatment of extreme PTSD. And we are signing up people to be registered for that trial currently. So there are developing movements, around psilocybin, around DMT, which is, Alex John probably knows more about this, but a derivative of the horned toad in the Southwest desert. And now all of these companies you see are developing their compounds synthetically. So they can get, the chemistry going and develop all these compounds and then sell the compounds. It's like the ketamine movement, infusion, pump houses is what I call them. I'm a person, I have to tell you this up front, I'm a person that feels like assisted therapy needs to happen along with any kind of compound that is altering. And my own daughter, she went to a pump house, while she was in college. And she signed up for 5 sessions for $2,500 or something. Now the ketamine compound that they use, it costs $5 to make. So people are making hand over fist for ketamine infusion therapies. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but we don't know, sort of the long-term effect without some sort of psychotherapy being engaged while you're, undergoing a treatment like that. And Ally John and I are thinking about utilizing ketamine-assisted therapy inpatient for people who have prolonged, extended inpatient experiences and they're under a lot of stress, and particularly around end of life. So, in terms of, pointing toward one or another, it's really the Wild West when it comes to people trying to find the right kind of foothold for their community. And what we're centered on right now has to do with ethics. It has to do with adverse effects. Noting them, documenting them, and then learning how to prevent them in the best way possible. Yep. No, we're studying, we're hopefully developing measures of the spiritual benefits, spiritual health. So that's another thing that I did when I took over as executive director for the hospital chaplains. Overnight, I didn't ask permission. It was called the Emory Center for Pastoral Services. And overnight, I said, tomorrow we are spiritual health. And people were looking at me, well, what does that mean? Well, I wanted us to be recognized within health science and to be engaged in research and to develop interventions that work at the bedside. Not just coming, and I say this kindly, not just coming to hold your hand or throw a Kleenex at something, right? But to really be developing methods and so forth that work with people who are in distress during their illness. So now I've forgotten what you were saying. Oh, the physical healing, yeah. Ali John is going to talk about pain. And, so he's going to be coming up in about 10 minutes. But you'll want to hear him speak. And there's a lot we don't know. There could be healing benefits physically because we've not done enough longitudinal studies. We don't know. But we're on the cusp of that. And, I have a great deal of faith that we're going to get there. Because what we're doing is we're taking things from the earth and we're trying to learn how it can be most beneficial to us. Any more questions or comments? Listen, I've had a great experience being with you. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to hearing from Ali John too. Thank you.